Rise programming. Welcome everyone to Mujeres de Maíz, We Rise programming. We're live now, and we just want to, express our joy and our appreciation for everyone out there who's taking the time to join us at this hour. As you all know, We Rise is funded by the LA County Department of Mental Health, and Mujeres de Maíz has been doing this for its second year now. So we want to thank the LA County Department of Mental Health. We all understand it's critical to make sure that we have all the tools and resources necessary to take care of our health. So thank you. I want to continue just by letting everyone know that I'm tuning in here today from Pala Reservation here with the Luiseño Pala people for the Indigenous Tribal Climate Science Summit. And so I have the honor to be able to interview today our guest, Olivia Chumacero. And it's a great theme where I am, and it's in alignment with the discussion that we'll have today with our Gran Maestra for Maestra Mondays, Olivia Chumacero. Um, I'd like to also just thank everyone from Mujeres de Maíz, everyone in the tech background there, taking care of all the technical needs, and everybody in the organizing and steering committees that have been doing this work for 25 years now. And we're going to have our 25th anniversary celebration coming up. That is May 22nd, our live art show at Self Help Graphics. And it's from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. It's free. Please come on by. We're going to have live music. We're going to have great vendors, support them all. And it's going to be an opportunity to be together in a safe manner. Wear your mask for those who are not certain, even though it will be outdoors. So, welcome everyone. And now let us begin with our wonderful guest today. Olivia Chumacero, poet, has worked with Teatro Campesino for a number of years, has also been working, caring for the land that we all walk on, specifically in California, and is an activist for the practice of walking in balance with our flora and fauna relatives. So, welcome, Olivia. And if you can take a moment to just share a little bit about yourself, your background, and it's an honor to have you here. And we're all very happy to see you.
Thank you, Maritza, and thank you for this invitation. I want to begin by acknowledging where I'm at, and I'm at Chukchansi and Mono land here near Yosemite, and I honor them and their ancestors. And at the present time, I am helping to restore an 80-acre parcel of land that I am working in conjunction with four other grandmothers from California, all indigenous women from here. And I'm honored to say that we have been restoring meadows and restoring the flora and taking out invasives. And that's where I'm at the present time.
Wonderful. Thank you, Olivia. And so let's start out. I've had the honor of knowing Olivia for over 20 years now. Woohoo! And it's been wonderful, a journey, like learning so much from you in your practice and all that you have been doing to care for our great Mother Earth and all her relatives, from spirit runs to taking teatro courses of the 20 Mayan step courses that you taught, from working with youth in East LA, Boyle Heights, to now, continuously working on land. And so if you can share a little bit, how did you come to be, Olivia, in this journey that you have been so committed to? What is it that compelled you to decide, this is my journey, this is how I'm going to live it, and this is the path that I'm taking and sharing with many? If you can please begin with that, and we'll lead into other questions from there.
Okay. Well, the journey actually began since I was a child, and we survived. And when I say we, I'm talking about my Raramuri, community from the Copper Canyon in the state of Chihuahua. And I grew up using fauna and flora for food, medicine, and for cultural ways. And when I was a child, my mother came to the States. And so when I came over here with her I was around 9, um, we were farm workers, and we would live in various labor camps, and we would travel from Texas to California. And one of the things that you do when you are in that type of community, you help support each other, especially when there are illnesses in the families, because you are barely surviving and there is no money to go see a doctor. And so within that community, there always existed people who would either know the plants or know different techniques on how to deal with broken bones and, pain and back pain and all that comes with doing that kind of labor. And so initially, it was just part of survival. And there was no separation as to what our responsibility to land and flora and fauna. It was just part and parcel of living. And as I grew up, and I was also working with the United Farm Workers, and from there with the Teatro Campesino. And for me, there was never a break. I was always making sure that even as I was growing and as my children were going, that I maintained that connection with the plants. What I did begin to focus on more intensely about in the early 90s was to deal and learn and apply the medicinal, food, and cultural uses of the native California flora. Because as time has gone by, it has gotten more and more difficult to take care of oneself, one's health, to feed oneself in a manner that is conducive to our well being. And that includes, in my mind, having a relationship with native flora, especially now as we are continuing to have and will continue to have water issues. And so it behooves us to begin to have that relationship intimately, because in every part of our Mother Earth, doesn't matter where, she provides us with flora and fauna so that we may eat, so that we may take care of our physical, you know, illnesses. And we cannot forget that. That is a legacy of knowledge that we hold as human beings. We hold that and we have that. Many of us may not have a written language, but that does not negate the fact that we continue to pass on from generation to generation many of the ways of which I'm now calling uh, indigenous traditional science, because it takes observation, experimenting, and applying what you learn from the flora and the fauna so that you can heal, so that you can thrive, so that you can create your community. And so, even though at moments I focused on other aspects of work, I was in the Teatro Campesino for 13 years. And then I decided I need to go to school, and I went to UC Santa Cruz and majored in film because I have always been interested in creating with the image, the moving image. And then along my path, I began to apply different things that I learned not only in the teatro, but in our spirit runs, in the manner in which we practice our breathing so that we might be able to have greater strength, greater endurance. And so, coming to everything is medicine, I did not give these practices an official name, and I did not actually start publicly doing all these things until um early 2001. Prior to that, many of the practices that I had were specifically for indigenous people, because as you know, we have been every aspect of our life has been invaded upon. Our languages, sometimes we don't know how to speak, and so many of the many of the uh, understood and used practices for healing and for introducing flora into our life for so that we might have health were kept private, because we do not do this to make money off a person when they are at their weakest, when they are ill. And so it was I went through various different, let's say, initiations and with different tribal people so that I might learn some of these things. And then I also went and got California certified with native plant restoration, because people would ask me, well, where did you learn this? And then when I would say, well, I learned it from the elders and from my family, and it doesn't have the same validity. It's not appreciated or given the same value that a formal Western education is given. So in my continued work, I always talk about um, the weaving of our traditional indigenous practices with the science knowledge that we have access to. Because to me, science is just another tool that we have created as human beings. And I am not going to negate that is a type of knowledge that will help us. But at the same time, I give and acknowledge the same amount of validity to our indigenous traditional science. I can't hear you.
I apologize there. Thank you. That is really important that you raise those issues, Olivia. Thank you first off for sharing your process and journey of being where you are now in your practice with the flora and fauna. And you know, you do raise a very critical issue there about the science and weaving, in your words, the traditional the traditional ecological knowledge, but in reality, science with Western science, in
Right.
order to create a formula that is very much in need, considering the place where we are now in dealing with this climate crisis. So, with that, I think it's a good segue to get into how environmental justice organizations will often, or in the historically, have been uh, led by white, mainly privileged leaders, and have rarely integrated or incorporated indigenous perspective and or views. Um, so how has that been for you in terms of navigating around that world? And now it's a little different today in that there is a call out. I mean, you have Deborah, um, the in oh my gosh, what is that position? Working in the Biden administration, internal secretary of the interior, uh,
Right.
Deborah Holland, working
Yes.
there, who is advocating for many tribes around,
Right.
this country there, and pushing for not only missing and murdered women issues, for example, but for environmental issues around tribal lands. So, how has that been for you on the ground level in your experience working with white-led environmental justice organizations and letting them know how important it is to include indigenous voices and
Yeah,
issues.
well, the hardest thing is that most of our indigenous communities are struggling, and their focus is surviving. So when I attend these predominantly white, uh, environmental organizations, their take is very, to me, very detached and very clinical, because for us, the perspective that we have is that we are an integral part of nature. But at no point are we separated from nature. And and in fact, all of science studies nature. So that separation is usually the hardest thing to begin to uh, uh, sort of mend with people, so that they can see and learn another perspective. Plus, the other thing that was very difficult is that I was in going to these workshops, to these organizations, thinking that they were actually going to work on behalf of nature. And many of the times it was just an economic base to make, more money, and abuse the land and the water and everything. And the consciousness for how to live on our planet in many ways was extracted, because the whole point was, again, on a commercial aspect. So that was difficult. That was difficult. The other thing is that for some reason they expected that I, as an indigenous person, would come and share my knowledge and give away my knowledge free. And so I was never approached with the same respect that, say, that a biologist, right? They would expect to give that person some compensation for coming in to speak. And that wasn't the case with me. And so even to this day, I'm always having to stand up for myself and tell people, look, I have expenses just like anybody else. And so I expect to have the same type of compensation for the work that I do. And that has been another difficult, situation. But I think that the problem that we have as human beings is the fact that we separate ourselves into all these different boxes and categories. And as you know, Marita, whenever I do anything, I always introduce myself in this manner. I am a human being. I belong to the tribe of human beings. And as this human being, I come from this part of Mother Earth in the Copper Canyon. My grandmother helped my mother bring me into this world, and I took my first breath in that part of the earth. And I am here as an indigenous person, and which is interesting because now it has become almost vogue to to be an indigenous person, whereas my entire life it was something that you didn't really speak up or say or acknowledge. And in fact, many of our people have lost their culture completely and do not even know from what tribes they come from because of that, because their parents wanted them to succeed in this modern world. And so none of this cultural knowledge was passed on. And we have lost quite a bit. And and now that's not the case. People are proudly saying from which tribe they come or what their ancestral lineage may be. And that's a good thing. But right now, we are in a situation where nature nature is demanding from us, the human being, because there are millions of other species on our mother planet. Millions. We are not the only ones that need water, a place to live, and food and air and heat from the sun. We're not the only ones. Yet we are the only species on this planet that is devastatingly abusing and poisoning the land, the water, and the air, just so that we might have a certain quality of life. And we need to look at that. I don't call it a fight against climate change. It is not a fight. I don't know where that expression came from. It's not a fight. It is an acknowledgement of our responsibility as a species on this planet. And we have that responsibility because we claim to be, you know, beings that are uh, that have an intelligence and a consciousness that is supposed to be able to absorb and use all of the gifts that our mother planet is so generously imparting with us, but we are using everything to the extreme and to the benefit of profit. And the fact that we even acknowledge that we're poisoning the air, that we're poisoning the water, and that seems as if nothing when you go and you walk and you see a river completely trashed, or you see no more water running in that river. Uh, the fact that we walk around and all these abuses are part of and parcel of how we are choosing to live and walk on this earth. And it is our collective responsibility. There is no one exempt, and there is no one person to blame. uh, uh, Corporations, of course, have a major responsibility, which they're not following through with. Because they are still acting as if all those resources are for them to take no matter what, and to do so in a manner that is conducive to making a greater and greater part of our population as a whole in the world uh, poor and poor. And and they are the beneficiaries of all this natural resource that the earth is providing for us. And so there are so many ways that whenever I give my workshops, I know that sometimes it can be overwhelming, or it can be almost to the some people get depressed. But and I'm an optimist. And so I always think about, wait a minute, what can you do? For example, I was talking to my grandchildren about the faucet and the water, okay, and talking about the light and getting out of the room or the living room and not leaving the light on. And so I was trying to figure out a way to make them understand. So I said, look, when you leave the light on in the room, or the TV on, or your device on, or you just leave that space and you no longer need to be there, and that light and that energy is being used, it is the same thing as leaving the faucet on in the sink after you brush your teeth, because it takes water to make electricity. And so I was trying to find very clear and simple images so that they could envision what their action were causing, because we collectively are doing that as well. They're not the only ones. And so every time I give a workshop, I try to find and make correlations and create images so that people can get the point.
Yeah.
Get the point.
Very, very important point that you raised there, Olivia. I'd like to um, highlight that point, and also I believe it's a good segue into the next question here. You know, so we as we started out by sharing how in your experience, and as of recent more so in mine, You've worked with a lot of organizations that are white led and didn't really respect your work as and your knowledge, your indigenous traditional science knowledge, by not even compensating you fairly as they would scientists, biologists, or and so forth. And So it's really important that now we make sure that indigenous folks are compensated in how they should be. Um, Now, as of recent as well, there has been a proclamation or an announcement on the conservation of water here in California for many of the reasons that many of us are aware of. There's a tendency to put a lot of responsibility on the consumers, the local people, um, as opposed to really focusing on the corporations that you mentioned that continue with their extractive businesses, their extractive
Practices.
practices, and are making money off of many. So, w- it, so we will definitely, there will definitely have an impact, especially on poor people, um, and
It's already having an impact.
it has
We
been.
we are already being impacted. Okay,
Exactly. So
and
I'd like.
and the biggest uh, um, within the context of reality, people don't realize California, the state of California, produces 65% of the entire nation's food, fruit, vegetables, and dairy, eggs, beef, pork, all the meats. 65%. So when you sit down and have a meal, 65%, if not more, of what is on your table comes from this state. And the water is a major issue. Nobody else is saying, well, maybe we should help the state of California with the water, right? They, if they want to eat, they want they want to go to the grocery store and have the food available. But it is not just a California situation. It is the entire nation. We are responsible. If we are providing that amount of food for the entire nation, the water problem that we're having, and it is continuing to be a problem because of the manner in which the water is extracted, whether it be groundwater, you know, or water that is redirected from the various rivers. Okay. It's there isn't there aren't any meters in out in the agricultural areas for the farmers that access that groundwater. Okay, and so they have been using in scientific practices that extract the water to the degree that now there are holes where the earth is sinking because the amount of water that has been taken from those areas is leaving pockets of empty pockets. And so the land sinks. Okay. Now, so it's not just our problem, and it's not just the population's problem or just the corporation's problem. We need to sit down at the table collectively, okay? And the corporations have to take the responsibility because they are making a major profit. When you talk to the person that's cleaning the street, they are not the beneficiaries of those profits that those corporations are making. And I talk about agriculture as a corporation because it's agribusiness. It's not the small farmer that we used to have like up until the 60s and early 70s. That's not the reality that we have now. So uh, if we're going to really begin to create change in a consciousness, it is at every level. You cannot blame somebody who is watering the tree as the person who is responsible for the lack of water in the state.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for raising that. That's a very important point there. And, it reminds me of when you first started, I think it was in 2013 with Mujeres de Maíz. We had our 2013 event. I do recall thinking, oh, it'd be great to have Olivia as a presenter here. And I wanted to make sure that, you were heard by, the working class communities, like the families that are hustling and having to work really hard, that they don't really even have time to acquire some of this knowledge that is shared by you, or to share their knowledge with
Right.
others. So and I know at that time you were doing a lot of work with water as well, and I recall vividly the workshop. We were in Boyle Heights at the new plaza. In fact, we broke in that plaza. Mujeres de Maíz was the first organization to use that new plaza off of the um, out there. And I recall the workshop where you talked about water. And I'm viewing the responses from the audience, and I mean, everyone was just, the elderly, the kids, the teenagers, they were really listening to the situation where it was like, oh, shoot, like I can almost hear, like, it's true. It's true. We take so much for granted, like the water situation. Um, so today, what I'm hoping we can do here, aside from imparting this important information, is really share some tangible things that we can do as a community, so that we not be self-reliant on any government sources, because you know that when it comes down to it, we are the ones that are going to have to be the ones to try and figure out how to get our drinking water. And as a community, how can we support each other in those efforts? What are some of the things we can begin to start doing or continue to do that
But
some of
one of
us
the things that
learn?
you can do is uh, plant life calls the water. Okay. So if you begin by using native California plants in your in front of your home, in your backyard, or even in your pots, if you begin to have that relationship with the flora, you're going to find out not only how this plant can live in nature, because it is going to initially take maybe 6 to um, 10 months, a year at the most, for you to nurture that plant. And eventually it will get to a point where all you have to do is make sure that it doesn't have any invasives, and make sure that you harvest or prune it so that it will continue to live, because all the native plants, this is their land. They're native because they are accustomed to living in the conditions of the soil in which they are at, and they survive with the amount of water that the year provides. When you begin to have that relationship, you also then can transfer that same knowledge to other plants that you are accustomed to taking care of. For example, if you have tomato plants or chili plants or cilantro or any other greens, and you begin to notice how to tend them without excessive water, you begin to uh, actually observe how they are from day to day, so that you learn to tell their various signs that they give us to let us know when they need water. And you'll find that just by beginning that relationship, it will open you up to so much of the rest of the flora and the fauna that is around you. Okay, because nobody lives in a vacuum there. That plant may be in the midst of trees, may be in the midst of concrete. That means that the heat it is getting is double. It's getting the heat from the top, from the sun, and then the heat from the reflection of the heat that's coming from the cement. And you have to begin to acknowledge and see and learn how to tend that. But for the community at large, there are plant trees, and that may seem very simple, but the reality is when you plant trees and you plant native trees and you plant trees that are conducive to the environment of the soil and the various components that make up that climate, it will thrive. And when you do that, underneath the ground with all the various roots that come, those roots begin to look for moisture, and the water is then being pulled up by those trees. And there's an organization in Los Angeles called the Tree People, and they donate trees, I believe, like twice a year, and they're free. Or you can go to the city, and they have an organization called City Plants, and they are supposed to provide you with trees that you can plant in your yard or outside along the sidewalk. So that's one way of doing these things. The other thing is start a farmer's market in your block. You don't have to wait for somebody else. In our communities, we're accustomed to having a plant of tomato, a plant of or a tree of papaya, and go around and create a farmer's market just with the block in which you are living, and begin to have that relationship, or access the community gardens, of which now there are increasingly more and more throughout the various parts of the city, right? And ask your elders, ask your elders. And if you don't have a very good relationship with your blood elder, find somebody else that you can, and begin to have that discussion so that you can engage on how to be self-sustaining. Okay, if we continue to depend on going to the grocery store or to the pharmacy for our medicine, um, it will be very difficult, especially as the water and the climate continues to change. And the climate, we 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 can affect different aspects of the climate, but the climate is going to continue being what it wants to be. The wind currents are going to bring rain when they bring rain. Okay. What we need to stop doing is poisoning. We're poisoning the soil, we're poisoning the water, and we're poisoning the air. In the 1970s, this whole process was called acid rain. Acid rain. They found that that was too harsh for people to accept. And so they changed from talking about acid rain that was poisoning everything to global warming. Okay, that was a little softer so people could use the word global warming. Now they're saying, well, we can fight climate change. And so we go with these terms that we create and trying to soften the reality that what we're doing is poisoning our world, poisoning our food, and therein poisoning our bodies, and depleting the earth of all its resources for the sake of benefit and profit. Why? Yes, we all need a place to live. We all need food. We all need to have well being. We all need that. But you know what? We're not the only ones. All the other species that live on this Mother Earth have the very same right. And here we are causing major extinctions happening daily. Why? So that we can have all the amenities that we are so accustomed to having now, and thinking that that is how we should live on this earth as human beings. And I'm always saying, think of being a reciprocal a human being when you are living your day. Think of acknowledging and thanking the water that you're drinking that day. Think about, okay, trying to mitigate your waste, because we waste so much. Don't leave your bottles half filled with water and then throwing them away. That's a precious. Water is precious. We cannot live without it. So to me, it's acknowledging, having a consideration, and having a mindset where your actions are reciprocal to all the gifts that the mother planet is giving us continually. And that perspective is something that all our indigenous communities in the entire planet have have lived and existed in that manner. And now here we are at a turning point, and most of that is due to the greed and all the money that people want to have and the profit that people want to have, and they really think and believe that that is how human beings should live. And what will happen if we get to the point where that river no longer runs and that fish has no home? And are you going to be able to eat that dollar? Is that dollar going to feed you and keep you, healthy and well? It is the relationship that we have with all these things that are of utmost importance right now for us as a species. And nobody is exempt from that responsibility.
Thank you so much. It reminds me of, along with all of that reality, that the work that we have to do as human beings, um, there's also the reality of the not just the material resources that are being depleted, such as water, but it's also the impact, the emotional and mental impact that it can have on someone, right? So you talked about planting trees as one of the ways to be able to help mitigate in the local communities, to begin a local community, a block farmer market, trade with your neighbors, trade in the community, or, use your, if you don't have a yard, use whatever you can plant in to plant those native plants.
Or maybe if you don't have anywhere to plant, and you're walking down the block and you see a senior, couple, and they could definitely use your help if you're a younger person. Maybe their lemon tree is just like all the lemons are on the ground because they cannot, be harvesting. Offer your services in exchange for taking some of that, you know. It's that. It may sound very simple, but at the base of all this is our humanity. At the base of all this is how we engage with each other in our everyday.
And it is simple. But in addition to that, like, the reason why we are where we are is because some of us have forgotten to appreciate the basic and not take the basic for granted. And what I mean by basic, here in this country, we have faucets that we can just turn on easily and turn off. This morning, I was had a brief conversation with our waiter when we were having breakfast here at this summit, and most of our team had our Sacred Places Institute for Indigenous People t-shirts on, and they say respect water. And he says, I like that t-shirt, I like it. And he's like, you know why I like it? Because my sister is from Mexico, she lives in Monterrey right now, and for the past 2 weeks they have not been able to get any water, no water at all, because all of a sudden it's gone and they don't know why. And we forget that. We forget that here. But those are just stories, and those stories are all around, right? Like, those
They're
stories
everywhere.
all around. The thing is, it's like we're finally here in California getting an idea of what that could be like. So going back to how simple it is, of the simple things that we can do, um, you know, here's a water bottle here, right? Um, and yes, many of us will drink that and leave it at the table, or some of us will go to that table and pick it up and water the plants that are around in the restaurant. just put the water somewhere. But those things, if we continue to practice them, they will impact in a good way.
Yeah, let me say that the advent of the bottled water, prior to the late to early 80s, no such thing existed. There were fountains in all the public parks, in all the public spaces, in all the major stores. There were water fountains that you could go and get a drink of water from. All of that got taken out. That infrastructure for drinking water got taken out, and the bottled water was introduced. Okay. Prior to that time, you could go anywhere and not have to worry about drinking water because it was there. Okay. But again, the answer was to make a business out of a bottle of water. Okay. And now here we are 30 years later, and we are creating mountains of waste with the plastic from all the bottles, mountains. And now we're at a point where people are saying, wait, well, there's no more water. Where did the water go? Well, a lot of the water is being extracted for business and commercial purposes. Okay. And that is comes first. That is a priority, not the human being, not the individual, that you can't live without water, right? And I say, we are the only species that charges each other for a glass of cloud, you know? We're
Well,
the only ones that do that.
that is true, and I want to share. I know that it was there's been a couple places where I learned this, but I know from you, for and it's being done more frequently in different circles. But it's about bring your own bottle for water, or bring your own plate. Bring your own plate. For there's going to be food at a potluck. Bring your own plate. Bring your own fork, so that you don't have to be using any plastics. Get the 5-gallon jug of water instead of buying water bottles for the event. So doing things like that also make a difference. And when that's done more frequently, it spreads. It
Right.
spreads in a good way. So those are also things that I have learned from you in my daily practice as well. And just hoping that continues. And speaking of what I have learned from you, and you have Everything is Medicine. You have your workshops that you've been teaching for a number of years. If you can just give briefly a little bit what the workshops are about, when people can sign up for them, and then after that we can talk a little bit about your next project, the current project that you're working on. It's about 7:15 now. We got about maybe 15 minutes, so let's get into Everything with Medicine and all the great work that you've been doing, and all the great gifts you've been offering.
Okay, so right now I just finished my Everything is Medicine spring workshop, and I offer in the spring, fall, and the winter. I offer a Everything is Medicine workshop, and I cover 8 different topics during those 8 weeks. And I charge for these workshops, and I'm holding them in Zoom, but before I would do them in person, but that has not been possible because of COVID. I am, however, going to have in-person workshop on the 23rd of July in downtown Los Angeles at the Naval Gallery. And that's going to be an all-day workshop. And I am focusing on how to breathe and heal your blood memory, and how to use toning to activate your vagus nerve so that you may have greater health and well being, and how to use the plants in conjunction with all those processes as well. So, Everything is Medicine is something that is ongoing. And obviously, I'll be doing more in person workshops as the situation hopefully improves. And and Everything is Medicine is something that I officially gave a name to, a practice that I had been doing, since the 70s. But I gave it a name, and I began the practice of giving the workshops at the anabolic garden which was funded by the Annenberg and the artist Lauren Bond and the California State Parks. And so I began to offer that workshop there in conjunction with using all the native flora that we have brought into the park so that people would learn how to manage, maintain, plant, and use for food, medicine, and cultural purposes, all the native California flora. So that's how that began. But I had been practicing that, especially when we went on spirit runs and especially in the Native American communities, because that was a subject for me that was important. It did not matter, um, where we were. We went all the way to Anchorage, Alaska. We ran in different parts of the continent. And the whole point was to be able to have these talking circles and make each other aware of how to proceed as a human being and acting responsibly and in a reciprocal manner with all of nature. So that's how that began. Right now, at the present time, I'm a recipient of the Pacific Standard Initiative grant from the Getty, and I am one of 3 researchers for this grant. And it is about the title of the project is called From the Ground Up, curated by Irene Tastos from the Armory. And in this work, we will be publishing the research done by each one of us. My focus specifically has been on the California oak and acorn, the manzanita bushes, and the California golden poppy. And those are all used for food and medicine and cultural purposes and continue to be used to this day by many of the indigenous communities that live here in California. So that's my project there. And I'm currently also collaborating with scientists from Caltech, Hillary Muskin, who is art and design at the campus there, and we're working specifically on the sinkholes and the groundwater issue in the Central Valley of California, and trying to figure out how to get all this data that we are now have access to from the geology uh, department, the U.S. Geological Survey, and NASA. They're giving us statistics and a lot of incredible information. Obviously, they focus specifically on certain areas, but it is our job to find ways to get this information to the general public in a manner that is um, easy to understand and that you can begin to see what the impact is, not only on the water, but the land and the communities themselves. And that's really important. And so the work continues, and I am now I'm retired, but I have more work than when I was actually working. And the other work that I'm doing, and this is ongoing, I work with an organization called Indigenous California Footsteps, ICF, and I uh, help to maintain an 80-acre parcel of land. And we are identifying the flora and taking out invasives. And as I've been there for 3 years, and I have been able, with the help of many volunteers, to restore an entire 2-acre area of meadow. And now all the native flora has come back. And Maritza, you were there in April when everything was blooming. And part of the work that we have as an organization, and we're all grandmothers, all of us that uh, comprise the board of this organization, is not only to take care of the land, but to make it available for California indigenous people who have no land and can no longer do their cultural ceremonies because they have no land. So that is another part of the work that we're doing. And I give workshops and I take people on hikes, and I teach you about how to harvest all the native flora, and uh, and talk about the cultural, the edible, and the medicinal uses. When it comes to the medicinal uses, I'm very careful because we have had everything taken away from us. We have had the land taken away, our culture, our languages taken away. And so, in many instances, what I do is when an individual approaches me, I want to teach them how to have a relationship with the flora, with the plants first, and see if they are actually wanting to invest their time and their energy in learning how to have and engage with this indigenous perspective on how to take care of the flora so that it will continue to help take care of us. And so in that respect, I'm, I'm really careful. We're also increasing a lot of the native flora so that the water can be drawn up, and we are able to increase the content of the water at the surface level. So those are all things that I'm working, and I'm also working with an editor, Ramona Alonso and Sarita Doherty, as the illustrators for a workbook, and Everything is Medicine workbook.
Wow. Well, you don't sound busy to me. No, I mean, you are doing a lot of wonderful work, and that is one of the reasons why I felt it was important to have you here because you have contributed so very much already throughout your years and have been such a great inspiration to so many, and a teacher, a maestra to so many along your journey. Um, and then you're still continuing the work, and I know you're going to continue it always. So I wanted to, in closing out, I'd like to know um, if you can share what drives you to continue that work. What is it that that compels you to keep doing this work?
um, Life, just life. I think I live in a straight state of gratitude every day. You know, I've had major physical challenges in my life. And so going through those experiences have also brought a light that I had not uh, paid attention to previously. And so that is part of what drives me. I want to also be able to leave as much of the knowledge that I have been privileged to learn from elders and from indigenous communities here in the United States and in Mexico, Central uh, America, and South America, and that I want to be able to impart that knowledge in a way that is not going to be abused or commercialized for the benefit of an individual, but for humanity. That's the most important thing.
Thank you. And that, folks, everything that Olivia is talking about, everything is medicine. Everything that she has shared with us.
Do I
Because,
have time for a poem?
we have 2 minutes left. So,
Okay.
yes, please share that poem.
Okay. Dedicated to your inner nature, that which comes natural to us all. Listen quietly to what it tells you. Live with it, away from everything and everyone. Be patient, give it time, nurture it in your everyday. Though it may be the challenge of all challenges, understand it like a child, swallowing, gulping, eyes engorged with curiosity. Gently let it deflower you through pain, through love. Allow these words to exude from your blood memory because anger and fear stunts the spirit, limits the breadth of road needed to travel in the way of nature. Do not stray, do not live distance from your inner nature. The heart will harden, run cold. Cradle your inner nature. Laugh without restraint so one day you may dance into your death song, thankful of the dandelion seed floating to nowhere, thankful of a mother's breath immersed in childbirthing pain. Contemplate in gratitude while dreaming awake because it takes a lifetime to know yourself. I can't hear you.
And that is Olivia Chumacero. Thank you for that medicine. We thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you, everyone. So we're closing out now. It's been an honor to have you, Maestra Olivia, and hasta la próxima.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for this invitation.